Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Williams, do you want to take about 30 seconds to respond?
It won't even take 30 seconds, Congressman. What I would say is if we're talking today about what's within Congress's powers and duties under Article 1 of the Constitution, one such thing is legislation. If Congress wishes to pass bipartisan legislation either about the Federal Elections Commission or lobbying requirements, have at it. That is Congress's role, and work together and do it. I would support it, and I'm sure many people in this room would.
Alas, our first bipartisan agreement.
We're in agreement there, I think.
Reclaiming my time.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Not from you. Thank you. First, I want to thank you, Ms. Parker. As a victim of the Cesar Sayoc bomb package case, along with my staff, I appreciate your service and the work that you did in the Miami Bureau. Mr. Williams, you worked in oversight for a long time, as you noted, in Congress for the executive branch. You've seen it at its best and worst. And although the Judiciary Committee has issued subpoenas over unfounded accusations just 2 weeks into this Congress, I know I have serious concerns over their rush to judgment, like many other committee actions that are employed by Republicans for purely political reasons. But their move also clearly shows that when Republicans are in charge, they use the levers of power to weaponize government. So can you tell us some examples of congressional oversight that has been abused in that way?
Well, what I will say, Congresswoman, is that when congressional oversight is abused, history doesn't treat it well. And none of us today are the judge or the guide, but history will be. And if, for instance, individuals are targeted, history will not be the judge of that if Congress is using its authorities to do so and overstep its bounds beyond the scope of its Article 1 authority.
Thank you. And what can members of Congress learn from past examples of the politicization of oversight?
I think past is prologue, and by recognizing that with a large platform as Congress has, it has the tremendous ability to harm people as much as it does to do good. And Congress ought to perhaps have that in mind when thinking about how to make government work better.
Thank you. In 2015, a member of Congress who happens to currently hold the gavel now in the House boasted that the Benghazi Select Committee was effective all because it hurt Hillary Clinton politically, saying, quote, "Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi Special Committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today?" Unquote. He even bragged in the same statement that because of it, her, quote, "numbers are dropping," unquote. During Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, Republicans held 9 investigative hearings focusing on her, including one where they called her to testify for over 11 hours. That was clearly politicized and weaponized oversight. And frankly, this weaponization committee itself epitomizes the weaponization of government. So, Mr. Williams, is it ever appropriate to turn congressional oversight authority into a weapon to harm a political opponent?
No.
And how can the politicization of congressional oversight harm the credibility of future congressional investigations?
That's exactly the point I was going to get to, Congressman. If the public loses its faith in Congress's ability to be a fair arbiter of oversight disputes, then what does Congress have ultimately? So yes, this is about the integrity of Congress, I think.
Thank you so much. Mr. Turley, turning to you, have you ever worked for Twitter?
No.
Do you have any formal relationship with the company?
No, I just have an account.
Do you have any specific or special or unique knowledge about the inner workings of Twitter?
Nothing beyond the Twitter files and what I read in the media.
So essentially, your responses to the questions here today were your own opinion and pure conjecture.
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I try to base them on what we know from the Twitter files.
Well, but you said that you don't have any specific or unique knowledge of Twitter, but you spoke as if you did. You were asked very specific questions about Twitter's, the way Twitter functions and the decision-making that they make, but yet you don't have any unique or special knowledge about Twitter and have never worked for them. And so this is only just your opinion, would you say, as a Twitter account user?
No, I've come to give legal analysis based on facts that are in the public domain, and I was really referring to what I was asked about the Twitter files.
Reclaiming my time, legal analysis is another word for opinion.
I would think there is some distinction, but yeah, it ultimately is an opinion, but I believe the question to me was based on what the Twitter files show, and that was my reading of the Twitter files.
Right. And again, that's another way of describing your opinion being offered, which was represented as unique and special fact, which you don't possess. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Mr. Chairman, before he goes, may I be recognized for unanimous consent?
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, gentleman's recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a Republican staff report from the Committee on the Judiciary dated November 4th, 2022, entitled FBI Whistleblowers, What Their Disclosures Indicate, and ask that the committee also provide a copy to Mr. Goldman so that he might be able to review all the staff notes compiled in the report.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
I thank the chairman. Dr. Turley, let me just go back, or Mr. Turley, let me just go back. How many times have you testified before Congress on behalf of all of us? Dozens and dozens and dozens over my 22 years.
I've testified both as a Republican and Democrat witness over 50 times, approaching 60.
So, to use a term of art, you're an expert witness when it comes to evaluating the Constitution and a great many laws and their interpretation.
That's how I've been called. That's why I've been called to this.
And you teach in that role.
I do.
Okay. And I want to thank you because in my 22 years, I have seen you representing both sides many times and normally treated with the respect that your opinions based on your readings or your scholarly work are generally respected by both sides of the aisle, and I thank you for that. You know, this committee is rightfully being talked about, subcommittee, about as weaponization of government, but I just want to clear up a couple of points. The previous operation known as Operation Choke Point, where government limited people's ability actually to have bank accounts, that would be weaponization by government, a decision by government to affect commerce, correct?
Well, it certainly affects commerce. There's no question about that.
Okay, and it's outside what one would think the administrative state has a right to do in any sense. Our liberties include that right to have commerce not impinged by, based on our political views by our government. So, in a sense, the weaponization of DOJ isn't new, is it? It predates this administration and even the previous one.
No, that's true. Some of the darkest chapters in our history have come from the Department of Justice losing that independence and objective element that they pride themselves on. And that goes back to the Palmer raids and even before then. And whenever the DOJ and the FBI has lost its way in that sense, it has come at a great cost to the country as well as the department.
Well, and speaking of lost their way, back in 2010, 2012, with the IRS's targeting of conservative groups headed by Lois Lerner, that certainly limited the free speech of those organizations when they were denied their ability to hold themselves as not-for-profits, correct?
That had serious free speech implications.
So when we look at the weaponization of government, we should not limit it to three-letter words over at DOJ, but in fact, we need to look at government broadly and how it might impinge free speech or our rights to simply have our liberties. And to that extent, we've covered a lot of the FBI, and I think that's important. I'm mentioning the IRS, but behind there, I have a concern about the FBI. Ms. Parker, I've got to go to you. Is that something that you think represents the neutralism of simply being law enforcement for the FBI basically to kneel in support of Black Lives Matter?
That would not be deemed appropriate. They're wearing their official FBI ballistic vests, and although, like we've mentioned, FBI agents, I have the right to my First Amendment thoughts, but I am not at the liberty to express any of my political or social opinions while on the job. I know that in that instance they were guarding our national institutions and that we heard that they were saying that they were trying to de-escalate the situation, but in those pictures it appears that there are people smiling, clapping. It looked very far from de-escalation to me, but it is not appropriate to make any sort of potentially political or social statement while wearing your FBI ballistic vest on official duty. No, it is not appropriate.
In the decades I served in the Army, we were warned about when in uniform being involved in anything that appeared to pick sides, and certainly they picked a side there. I want to just close my questioning because we're going to be doing this probably for 2 years, and ask a question again, Mr. Turley. We have this question of government and what it's doing, but a lot of people are talking about how Twitter's a private company, Facebook's a private company. They're all private companies. Isn't it fair to say that from a standpoint of statutory and constitutional history, our government has clearly looked at entities which convey free speech, newspapers, radio, television, and has limited the concentration of power and the concentration of ownership in order to maintain, although private, an ability for all, or at least most, free speech to find an avenue? Isn't that the history that we're also going to have to look at when it's concentrated in just a few companies?
It is, and the fact is that much of our political dialogue now takes a place on social media, which has replaced even telephones as a common form of communication. And that's why it is true that private companies can limit speech. But you have to keep in mind, these are communicative companies. These are closer to AT&T than they are Starbucks. And that raises a serious question in terms of not just looking at the government aspect of coordinating and targeting citizens for possible censorship, but the control of these companies over speech. And I think that people that sort of dismiss that are really losing the fact that this is now much of what is the marketplace of ideas. The marketplace of ideas is now a digital marketplace, and it's controlled by these companies.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm so glad my friend from California just brought up Lois Lerner and the IRS, and your comment, Professor Turley, that was troubling in terms of targeting a particular point of view, because, of course, that's not true. As we learned, the Inspector General, the TIGTA, deliberately focused only on conservative filters, even though he was presented with clear evidence that the filters were nonpartisan. There were liberal filters, lefty filters, conservative filters, Republican filters, Democratic filters, but they chose because they wanted to make a case that this was deliberate censorship and targeting by the IRS. Wasn't true, never was true. False premise. And that's what I worry about right here on this committee. The premise is the FBI is tainted. The FBI is doing dirty work. It's got the hobnail boot of government on the necks of the American people who are simply trying to express themselves. Mr. Williams, you think the insurrectionists, thousands of them, who came here, many of them armed, that led to 5 deaths and the storming of the Capitol, to try to prevent the constitutional certification of the counting of the ballots for the President of the United States on January 6, 2021. You think that was nothing more than patriots that got a little carried away and they were just expressing their First Amendment rights, and the FBI shouldn't have been looking at it and certainly shouldn't be prosecuting people for it?
Well, certainly, sir. I believe almost 1,000, if not over 1,000 people have been charged with crimes in connection with that day. Several people have now been convicted by juries and also with findings that were affirmed by federal judges of seditious conspiracy. That's using force or threats to impede or delay the execution of laws of the United States. So
I guess I hear you saying we need to make a distinction between the expression of views, which is absolutely protected under the Constitution of the United States, First Amendment, and the use of violence to propound and propagate those views.
That is correct. So the First Amendment does not protect the use of violence.
Correct. In fact, that's illegal.
Correct.
So when we talk about parents just going to school boards, trying to express their concerns, that's true. Many parents go. I was a parent with a kid in a school system. I was a card-carrying PTA member. I certainly testified now and then about the school budget or school issues, but I didn't threaten the lives or families of school board members. I didn't anonymously threaten violence or let it be known that I knew where they lived and that there'd be trouble. That's a different form of speech, isn't it?
Yes.
Would it be wrong for the FBI under some circumstances to be called in to look into that for the protection of elected school board members and, for that matter, active parents.
Both the FBI or state and local authorities who also have the ability to investigate violent crime.
So do
Both
you think the FBI is the enemy of the American people?
I do not believe, in my experience, look, again, I was in
Do you
government
think
for 15
the
years, I do not.
FBI ought to be defunded?
I do not believe the FBI should be defunded.
So,
sir,
for
no.
example, if they were, the Tampa field office that infiltrated and spent 6 months embedded in a network of ransomware gag, Hive, and took it down. Hive is no longer functioning. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That is a very good thing. Look, I was a prosecutor and a senior executive at the Justice Department. Fighting crime is a good thing, and I think we can all agree on that.
I see. So they're not just, censoring free speech. They're actually doing some good things that protect the American people.
Yes.
Would you say that characterizes largely their mission and their function?
In my experience of working with the FBI and other federal law enforcement for years, absolutely, sir, that was my experience.
So we have to put everything in context here. We can't allow somebody who asserts they're up to no good because a particular agent or a couple of agents may be doing X, Y, and Z, ought not to taint the entire function and mission or personnel of the FBI. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, correct.
And that goes to their other missions: cybersecurity protection, human sex trafficking, breaking up those rings, and for that matter, protecting us from domestic extremists who are propounding and using violence as a weapon to further their cause.
What is special about the FBI, sir, very quickly, is that unlike many other law enforcement agencies, it has both a counterterrorism element and a law enforcement element. Now, many people may think those are all one and the same, but those are actually two different functions. And so, yes, both of those help keep the American people safe.
I thank you, and I yield back.
I think the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and to witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Turley. My condolences that you've had to sit through 60 of these, but thank you for being willing to do that. I look forward to hearing from all of you, but Mr. Chairman, I also look forward to hearing others who are key to this investigation. Christopher Wray, the Attorney General, former FBI Director Comey, former CIA Director Brennan. I hope we have a chance to hear from them as well. I want to share with you my first experience in this area. 2017, member of the House Intelligence Committee, after months and months of stonewalling, we were finally allowed to go to the FBI building and to read the FISA application on Carter Page. And after reading that application, it was very, very clear to me the FBI has lied to the FISA courts. The FBI has lied to Congress, and the FBI has lied to the American people. After that, I had a similar experience with some CIA documents and then other agencies. And the result of this is when, Mr. Turley, you talk about losing the faith of the American people, if an FBI agent called me today and said they wanted to speak with me, I would never speak to them, regardless of the topic, without my attorney present. And by the way, Congress has to reauthorize 702 this year. And we are a long way away from getting the trust of confidence because of the subject we're talking about today. And we'll lose a valuable tool if many people are simply going to say, we won't give them that authority, they abuse it. I'd like to focus on the FBI abuse if I could. I'd remind you, Carter Page was an innocent American citizen. The FBI said he was a Russian spy. Turned out that was not true. In fact, turned out there was zero evidence that he was a Russian spy. And yet, the FBI IG went and looked at the FISA application, and this is what they found. And Mr. Williams, I hope you'll pay attention to this because I'm going to ask you a question about this. They found 17 significant errors or omissions. They found 51 wrong or unsupported factual assertions, including FBI lawyers who simply made up evidence and included it in the FISA application. Disgusted by this, I would suppose, the IG went and looked at random 25 other FISA applications and found significant inconsistencies and omissions in every one of them. Mr. Baker, you're a former FBI agent. Do you think that 17 omissions, 51 wrong assertions in a FISA application that, by the way, if you're going to get one right, don't you think the one that's targeting the President of the United States would be one you'd be particularly careful of? And yet they found that many omissions. Do you find that a standard acceptable?
Of course not, Congressman. And in fact, it's actually even worse than you described. The there was exculpatory information available that was not considered. Some of the information that was considered, we now know from the Steele dossier was false.
That's right, and the list goes on.
But even beyond that, the fact is that individual American, that U.S. person, Carter Page, should not have been subject to that FISA surveillance because he was an individual who, this is all on the public record now,
Be brief,
had
please. I wanna
cooperated with the
continue.
CIA and the FBI in
That's right.
previous investigations. So he would, by the guidelines that existed then, he should have been excluded from FISA. He could have been directly interviewed.
That's right. Mr. Baker, I'm going to cut you off because
Okay.
you've made your point. Mr. Williams, do you think that, as I've described to you, 17 omissions, 51 wrong assertions in one FISA application is professionally done?
Sir, I would say that this is a matter that continues to be of interest to the Justice
It's a
Department.
simple question. Do you find that acceptable? I think it's hilarious that you won't say, no, I don't.
What I'm saying, sir, is that this is a matter before the Justice Department and Congress that has been ongoing for years.
Okay,
and
so
should
you
correct-
won't answer the question
What
if
I
you
will
find
say
that
is
acceptable.
that it makes sense for you to direct the question to the Justice Department.
I'm asking your opinion. I'm not asking for any insight into their investigation. I'm asking for a simple opinion. Do you find that acceptable?
What I will say, as is
Okay,
my
never mind. You're not
opinion-
going to answer the question.
I think he's answered.
Because of this, the FBI initiated reforms. And you know what they were? Trainings. Here's some trainings for senior FBI officials. Training number 1, don't lie to FISA courts. Training number 2, don't make things up. How about training number 3, don't hide evidence. That's what senior officials in the FBI did. And if I wish I had more time, I'm almost out of time, because I would come to you and ask, first, Mr. Williams, I'd come back one more time and ask you if you find that acceptable or not, but we won't waste time with it. I would ask, how do we restore faith in the FBI? Because we want to trust the FBI. And people say you're going after the FBI. What nonsense. We're trying to protect the FBI. I know FBI agents who are deeply offended by what they see. They want us to hold them accountable, and that's what the committee is going to do. Thank you.